Hello everyone! Welcome back to another episode of Literature Class. I'm Percy and today we are talking about postmodernism. Postmodernism is one of the most interesting and probably most complicated when it comes to its application to literature. It started as an art movement but was extended to a lot of the other spheres of society, such as literature, philosophy, economy, and of course, popular culture. Before we continue our discussion on postmodernism, I want to show this picture to everybody and I want you to answer my question. Is this picture beautiful? Some people would say yes. Some people would say no, definitely a urinal is not beautiful. But the next question is this picture an art? Is the urinal an art? Can you consider this an art? And that is a good question for us to begin with as we talk about postmodernism. Why am I raising that one? This is a popular piece of art called The Fountain. Fountain is a ready-made sculpture produced by Marcel Duchamp in 1917. In April 1917, an ordinary piece of plumbing chosen by Duchamp was submitted for an exhibition of the Society of Independent Artists. The inaugural exhibition by the society to be staged at the Grand Central Palace in New York. In Duchamp's presentation, the urinal's orientation was altered from its usual positioning. Going back to the questions that we raised a while ago, is that beautiful? Is that considered art? These questions will challenge our standard or understanding of what is beautiful and what art is. We have an understanding of what is beautiful from the classical period moving forward until the modern period. We know that beautiful is something that is elegant, something that is pleasing in the eyes, and so on and so forth. We know that when you talk about art, we are talking about something that is beautiful, something that has a certain symmetry and color combination when it comes to painting or visual art. For sculpture, it has a very good, unique pattern of smoothness, of symmetry, just like what we said, of probably length and width, and different ways of looking at how a sculpture can be considered beautiful. But postmodernism challenges that. It challenges our standard. Who says that is beautiful? Who says that is not beautiful? Who dictates the standard of beauty? Who dictates what an art is? Now, before we continue, I want you to take a look at this example as well of architecture. There is what we call a modern architecture. Look at the building. It has symmetry. It has a pattern. There is a window here and a window there. There is probably an exact measurement, and that looks elegant. That looks perfect, quote unquote. Now look at the other example. It defies structures and patterns. There can be a window here and probably not a window on the other parallel side. There can be a structure over here that is not parallel to the other structure over there. It doesn't matter because in a postmodern architecture, patterns were defied, standards were questioned, and beauty is not just an ideology that is passed on as something that is ready available, ready made for you to accept, but even the standard of beauty is being challenged. And those standards were extended not just in terms of art and literature, but even in terms of ideology, in terms of beliefs, in terms of, let's say, morality. Some people would say this is right, this is wrong, but in postmodern perspective, they started to question even religious perspective by saying, who are they to claim that this is the standard of goodness? We can always have our own standard, probably, or we can question or criticize the standards that was passed on to us. Now, what is postmodernism? It's the condition of knowledge in the most highly developed societies, a state of culture following the transformations which, since the end of 18th century, have altered the game of rules for science, literature, and the arts. It leads us to incredulity towards metanarratives. So when you say incredulity towards metanarrative, it is a questioning of the narratives that were passed on to us. We call it the grand narrative in other translations. And it means that those narratives of morality, of religion, of beauty, of art, of education probably were something that was passed on to us for us to accept. But in the postmodern era, what they're saying is we can criticize or question those standards that was passed on to us. These narratives or grand narratives or meta narratives were not readily available for us to just accept. Instead, there is always the doubting of the standards. Why do we have to believe the past? Why do we have to just accept what they say is right? What they say is beautiful, what they say is good. We are in the position in the postmodern era to challenge those narratives. That is the incredulity towards meta-narratives. Now, let's go closer to meta-narratives and talk about this one. This is coined by Jean-François Lyotard, a theory that tries to give a totalizing, comprehensive account to various historical events, experiences, and socio-cultural phenomena based on an assumed universal truth. In postmodernism, there is no longer a need to quote the grand narratives because they are incorporated to the point where the line between high art and commercial forms seems increasingly difficult to draw. Metanarratives, as coined by Jean-François Lyotard, is the grand narrative that was passed on to us that talks about the past's standard. But in postmodernism, Lyotard is simply saying that these standards were already passé. These standards were already useless because there is no need to quote the past anymore. And in postmodernism, the assumed universal truth that was passed on to us is being challenged. These universal truths were truths that were popular in religion, in communities, in society. And these universal truths, quote unquote, were being challenged in the postmodern era. Now, more of meta-narratives. There is what we call the death of subject, the end of individualism. In the modernist, aesthetic was linked to the conception of the unique self and private identity, a unique personality and individuality. But in postmodernism, aesthetic is linked to the death of the subject or the end of individualism. The claim in postmodernism is that the past is now unreachable and probably useless. There is no need to refer to the past. There is no need to refer to those universal truths that we embraced for centuries already. In postmodernism, again, let me emphasize that it questions those standards. Modernists focuses on the uniqueness of the subject. When, for example, you look at a painting, it tries to give us an image of the subject, which is the person being painted. And that talks about the unique personality, the unique traits, the unique physical features or beauty of the one in the subject. So that subject reveals the uniqueness of the self or the uniqueness of identity. In literature, let's say, characters are meant to talk about these unique subjects, this unique personality, which is linked to the reality that all of us have these values being seen in the character. The significant human experience being revealed by the character in a story is similar to our experience. It's a mimesis or a representation, an imitation of reality, just like in fiction. But in postmodernism, they tried to destroy that. They said that characters are not meant for us to just reflect on and see the values being portrayed in those characters. Instead, we can question the kind of standard those characters in the story reveal or portray. That's why the death of the subject is the end of individualism, the end of uniqueness of the subject. They try to distort everything. It's like saying the standard of the past is unreachable. Therefore, we don't need the past because we can never go back to before. There's no need to refer to the before. There's no need to refer to those values, to those truths that were introduced and embraced by our generations. In postmodernism, everything is challenged. Those universal truths no longer exist. Now, since there's no need to refer to the standards of the past, those narratives, and the values that were attached to those things of the past, everything now in postmodernism becomes relative. Take a look at this example, the painting of Mona Lisa. This Mona Lisa is very popular in history, and this is created by the artist Leonardo da Vinci. It is considered a masterpiece of the Italian Renaissance and has been described as the best known, the most visited, the most written about, the most sung about, the most parodied work of art in the world. They refer to Mona Lisa as a subject of individualism. Its uniqueness was depicted in the painting. So the color combination, the symmetry, everything else there is as an element of a beautiful painting or a beautiful work of art is present in Mona Lisa. That's why they refer to Mona Lisa in so many other narratives in history, in art studies, in cultural studies, and so on and so forth. But look at the other picture about Mona Lisa. This postmodern Mona Lisa says no one cares about the origin, nor the artist. There are several variations of the art, and it has already lost its original meaning and significance, as well as its supposed value. So they tried to refer to the original Mona Lisa, but will not care about what Mona Lisa is for. It's not about the color combination. It's not about the standard of what is beautiful. It's not about the uniqueness of the person. It's not about the subject. It's nothing. It's not important. I can always create my own Mona Lisa based probably on the past, but the past will not matter. So it's just a reference, an intertextual reference to the present. But all the values attached to it, all the standards attached to it is meaningless already. That is postmodernism. Now, when it comes to literature, there is a literary device that is linked to postmodernism, and we call it pastiche. It is kind of similar to parody, but it's more than a parody. What is pastiche? Pastiche is one of the most significant features or practices in postmodernism. Pastiche is usually confused with parody, just like what we said, and both pastiche and parody involve imitation or mimicry of other styles and particularly of the mannerisms and stylistic twitches of other styles. Now, for us to be able to understand the difference between a pastiche and a parody, let's try to take a look at this grid. Parody capitalizes on the uniqueness of style and seizes on their idiosyncrasies and eccentricities to produce an imitation which mocks the original work. So in a parody, there is mockery. There is the usage of a certain figure from the past maybe, and you try to use it as a satire to probably mock or to create comedy, to question or like be sarcastic about the subject matter. So when you have a parody, for example, of a popular politician, you try to emphasize the negative sides of that person. So the subject matter, being the politician, in parody is being used as a satire. But in a pastiche, it's different. Pastiche, like parody, the imitation of a peculiar or unique style, the wearing of a stylistic mask, The ulterior motive is without satirical impulse and laughter. Pastiche is a blank parody, a parody that has lost its sense of humor. So pastiche is not meant to mock or to be satirical about the subject. Pastiche has lost its original sense of meaning. That means since there is no reference to the past anymore when it comes to standard and universal truth, everything in the past is taken as just an object. One of the claims of postmodernism is that there's nothing new anymore. Everything is already said and done in the past. So what you do as a form of pastiche is to get bits and pieces of the past and combine it to create something quote-unquote new, which is not totally new, but just to create something else, because the claim is there's nothing new anymore, so you just create from whatever is existing before. But it is not meant to be satirical, it is not meant to mock or to be humorous. It's just a piece of chop suey created to form another piece of art. That is a pastiche. More about postmodernism. The great modernists invented a personal style, a private style, as unmistakable as fingerprint in the likes of Picasso, Proust, Eliot, etc. But for the postmodernists, this is a thing of the past. Stylistic innovation is no longer possible. All that is left is to imitate dead styles. Just like what we said, according to the claim of postmodernists, there's nothing new anymore. Everything is said and done. And these things of the past can be used, bits and pieces of it, to create another form of art. But has nothing to do with its reference. Meaning, I can create a character that is a popular character from the past, but that doesn't mean that I would also take the values and the personality attached to that character. It is just a blank parody. It is just used because I cannot create something new anymore because everything is said and done already. So therefore, I will just choose from the past but will not refer to its attributes anymore. Sounds confusing for a lot of us, so that we have to move forward. Writers and artists today will no longer be able to invent new styles and worlds. They've already been invented. Only a limited number of combinations are possible. The unique ones have been thought of already. That is the characteristic of postmodern literature. Nothing is new, everything is said and done, therefore let's just use it without referring to its original intention, its original value. Let's just use it plainly, randomly. Let me give you several examples of postmodern literature. The first one is this one. We are familiar with the story of Sleeping Beauty. We know that there is that evil mother, an evil witch sort of saying. And the character attributed to that is a character of an evil woman, an archetype of someone who will harm you, someone who is an antagonist in the story. But in postmodernism, they use the old character but create a different story. So there is the reference to the past character, but there's no reference anymore to the original intention of the author. Instead, they created a different story, a background story for the character, and it's maleficent. There is now the binary opposition between an evil mother but a good mother at the same time. Someone who is capable of doing good despite the original intention of the author, which is to make it bad, to make her bad. See, that is the power of postmodernism. You refer to the past, but do not refer to the values of the past. Instead, you create something new out of something that is not totally new. Okay, moving forward. Another example is a classic piece of literature. It is called The Life and Opinions of Tristram Shandy by Lawrence Stern. In traditional literature, we know that narratives are meant to just explain or expose or narrate. Just tell the story, just tell the description there. But in Lawrence Stern's Tristram Shandy, take a look at this picture. They use, or he, Lawrence Stern, used a different way of narrative, a different way of narration. through all of these scribbles that is hard to be understood. So instead of using words, he used something else that confuses the readers at first. Another example is from the same novel. Instead of using words, he used asterisks. And it is explained in the story. Again, I will not explain what these are, but I want you as a literature student to read it on your own. Okay, moving forward. Another example is the musical Moulin Rouge. The story of Moulin Rouge is a good example of a pastiche. That means it uses different elements from different existing past characters or incidences and combine them together to form another piece of art. In the story, there is the presence of a character similar to Tinkerbell from Peter Pan. What is that character? What is that tiny flying fairy doing in Moulin Rouge, which is set in Paris, France? So they refer to the character of Tinkerbell, not literally Tinkerbell as a name, but the same character, and use that in the movie. Other than that, they also use the song of Madonna, which is Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend, as one of the songs in the story in Moulin Rouge. So the existence of that old song before was used in a different context. Not anymore linked to the original intention of the composer of the song, but was used for a different purpose. So it has lost its meaning already, but it's still something from the past used in the present, because just like what we said, there's nothing new anymore. So might as well use the past and create something new out of it. It's a pastiche. Another noticeable thing about Moulin Rouge is the existence of the windmill in Paris. There are no windmills in Paris, but there is a windmill in the story. So that is weird. So that windmill is very symbolic in Moulin Rouge. So if you have time, watch the film and you will see a lot of elements of postmodernism present in one movie. And of course, closer to home are examples of stories of affair, of kabit in Filipino. We know that from the past, the grand narrative is a kabit or an affair, a significant other is always looked at in a negative way. You know that if you are the mistress of a husband, that means you are evil. That means you are a pervert or always negative. That's the grand narrative. But the standard is being questioned now. Back from the past, women in illegitimate relationships are always considered negative. But in postmodern period, they can question the standard and say what's wrong if there is a story behind it. So they now try to beautify the account of a mistress. So they defy the structure of kabit. That's why these several movies and teleserye and series from the Philippines highlights the story of the second woman instead of the original wife. And they said that we can also regard them as a person that is worthy of being looked at decently because there's always a story behind it. See, there's a changing of standard now. There's a changing of times when it comes to postmodernism. There is now a different way of looking at the kabit, a different way of looking at the illegitimate relationships, not just for women, but even for men. And in postmodernism, they do not accept the grand narratives anymore. They do not accept the universal truths of the past. They questioned it, they defied it, they tried to destroy the subject, the death of the subject. They destroyed individualism and instead questioned everything. We know that postmodernism is very complicated. That's why in the next episodes, we will be using stories and apply postmodernism for us to be able to see it better and to see how it's used in literature. So I hope that you learned something today in our introduction to postmodernism. This is not all about postmodernism yet. It's too much to talk about. That's why we will put this in different episodes and different sessions so that we can go deeper to postmodernism. So I'll stop from here and will ask you to read the story The Second Bakery Attack by Murakami Haruki. It's a Japanese short story, and we will take a look at postmodernism applied in this story. That's it for now. Thank you for joining me in our literature session today, and happy reading.